Hello
everyone, welcome. Welcome to this third lecture of the second issue of the Bulletin of Near Eastern Excavations and Research. I am Valentina Santini, but before introducing today's speaker, I would like to remind you that this bulletin is focused on current archaeological excavations and projects in the Near East, and it is intended both for the scientific and the general public. Therefore, since we are live, as you can see, if you would like to learn more, if you would like to comment on the topic of today's lecture, you can add a comment in the live chat, which is here in this page next to the video. And at the end of the lecture, I'm going to read your questions, your comments to our speaker. So now it's time to introduce our speaker, Daniele Morandi Bonacossi from the University of Udine, who will talk about, as you can see, northern Iraqi Kurdistan between the Assyrian Empire and Alexander the Great, the land of Nineveh Archaeological Project. So thank you so much, Daniele.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are on the planet. Thank you for this very nice and kind introduction. And let me please first give the possibility to express my gratitude to Stefano Valentini and Guido Guarducci as well for this kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here and share the results of our Land of Nineveh archaeological project with all of you. As you all know, after decades of political and military crisis and socioeconomic strife in the Kurdistan region of Iraq since 2009, 2010, thanks to the very liberal policy of openness to foreign missions that was pursued by the Directorate General of Antiquities in Iraq, the region of Iraqi Kurdistan has become a focus and main focus of archaeological field research, and a very large number of survey projects and archaeological excavations have appeared in the area. In this map, you see all the archaeological surveys which are currently ongoing in the area. And this is a unique experiment because to my knowledge, there is no country of the Near East which has so far been systematically surveyed as is the case of the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And the Land of Nineveh Archaeological Project is one of these survey projects. As a result of this, Iraqi Kurdistan is now emerging not only as a new frontier in Near Eastern archaeology, but also as a very promising laboratory for the testing and the development of innovative methods and technologies in field research, especially in the field of landscape archaeology and in the field of multidisciplinary research. This map shows all or most of the archaeological excavations which are currently ongoing in the region. In the red circles, the two archaeological excavations, Gir-e Gomel and Faida, that we are conducting together with our Kurdish colleagues, especially with Dr. Hassan Ahmed Qasim, who is Director of Antiquities in the city of Duhok. The Land of Nineveh Archaeological Project, which has been called in this way, because as you see from this map, the area where we are working is located in the hinterland of what used to be ancient Nineveh, present-day Mosul, here about 60 kilometers to the south of Duhok, which is the city where our archaeological expedition is based, is a project that was established almost 10 years ago in 2012, which aims to study the formation and transformation of the cultural and natural landscapes of a very vast region of the Duhok Governorate, 3,000 square kilometers approximately, from the prehistory, from the very early prehistory, from the lower Paleolithic to the Islamic period, to the Ottoman period, and to nowadays. The area, as you see, is very large and very differentiated in terms of natural landscapes. We have the mountain landscapes of the Zagros mountain range, Piedmont area, dotted with archaeological sites, the rolling plains to the east of the Tigris, riparian landscapes like the one that you see here in these slides taken on the Tigris River, and the very fertile Navkur plain in the center of our research area. And to very differentiated natural landscapes do correspond also very articulated and very differentiated archaeological landscapes dotted with dozens or hundreds of multi-phase mound settlements, tells, as they are called in Arabic, that you see here in these two slides, but also very different sites like infrastructure, for instance, fortresses, bridges, ancient water mills, or also pastoral landscapes like the one that you see here in the Piedmont region, in the foothill region of the Zagros, which is dotted with hundreds, not to say thousands, of these funerary cairns. LONAP has different goals. First of all, the reconstruction of the history of settlement and land use in this very big area at the very heart of northern Mesopotamia, and has also different foci. First of all, the prehistory, the study of the Neolithization process, the process of the agricultural revolution, the emergence of social complexity, state formation, the emergence of the first cities, but also the emergence of the first global empires in the history of the ancient Near East, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and the engineering of the landscape which the empire conducted, particularly during the last centuries of the Assyrian Empire, the 9th, 8th, and 7th century BC. Part of our activity is devoted also to the protection, conservation, and enhancement of archaeological heritage. So first, one of the most important goals is to create a gazetteer of archaeological sites in the area and to hand it to the local directorate of antiquities in order to guarantee a better protection of this archaeological heritage, which is very endangered, as we will see, at least in several cases. The recording, conservation, and enhancement of the cultural heritage is also a very crucial topic. We have been working since 2012 on the recording and protection of the irrigation system built by the Assyrian kings in the hinterland of Nineveh, part of which, as we will see together, is located in the northern region of Kurdistan in the Duhok governorate. And we have developed a project for the creation of an archaeological park of the Assyrian irrigation system, and a project for the proposal of inclusion of this tremendous cultural heritage into the tentative World Heritage list of UNESCO in order to guarantee a better protection and enhancement of this endangered cultural heritage. And the final focus or goal of our project is the cooperation with our Kurdish colleagues and the training of Kurdish archaeologists in the region of Duhok, Acre, and Zaho. What did we know about the region of the Land of Nineveh archaeological project before the beginning of the project? Not very much indeed, but we had some information. some information deriving mainly from the archaeological excavations that have been carried out in the framework of the construction project of the Eski Mosul Dam that you see here on the Tigris, the biggest dam of Iraq so far, built between 1981 and 1984 during Saddam regime. The construction of this dam determined also the launching by the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage in Baghdad of a rescue project, a salvage project of the area, which was then flooded by the creation of the Eski Mosul lake. And as you see from this map, slightly more than 30 archaeological sites have been investigated through archaeological excavation, and many others only through surveys. So we had already some information to the informations on the Eski Mosul Lake sites. We have to add also some other information on a dozen of other archaeological sites that you see here in the area of the land of Nineveh archaeological project proper. And these sites had either been thoroughly archaeologically investigated. This is the case, for instance, of the Assyrian aqueduct of Jarwan, which was excavated back in the 30s of last century by an expedition of the Oriental Institute in Chicago, or the site of Hemis, Bavian. But other sites like Jirahia, like Gir-e Gomel and Faida had been only anecdotally explored. And two sites here, Shanducha and Tel Sumel, were the target of archaeological excavations carried out by the local Directorate of Antiquities under the directorship of Dr. Hassan Ahmed Qasim, our partner in Duhok. So the picture or the knowledge that we had on the archaeology of this very important region of the upper Iraqi Tigris was rather limited and unsystematic, and relied mainly on anecdotally collected archaeological data. More information is contained in the Atlas of Archaeological Sites in Iraq, published in 1976 by the Directorate General of Antiquities in Baghdad. But many datings, of course, of these sites are now outdated because based on pottery repertoires, which are today not so representative anymore. Our knowledge, of course, of pottery series and typologies has increased, and to the extent that sometimes the dating contained in the Atlas of Archaeological Sites in Iraq cannot be accepted anymore. How did we work in our landscape archaeology project? We relied very much on remote sensing, using basically mainly historical aerial and satellite intelligence imagery, mainly corona images of the corona program, of the hexagon program, and which are both satellite imagery, as you all know. But we used also imagery taken by another American project, the U2 aerial images, which have been made available to our expedition by the kindness and courtesy of my colleague Jason Uhr, who supplied us with many, many historical photographs. And as you see from this map, which is describing the flight path of a particular mission of the U2 spy program, we have a very dense concentration of pictures in the very core of the Lonap research area, the Nafkur plain, which is a very fertile and well-watered plain at the heart of our study area. And by chance, this mission, which was taken in January of 1960, has provided us with quite a great deal of really fantastic images of many tales of the region. Just to give you an idea of how important and how useful these U2 images are, I want to show you a comparison between a modern digital globe satellite image of the site of Gir-e Gomel, one of the sites in the heart of the Nafkur plain that we do excavate with our Kurdish colleagues. You see, it is a very blurred image with a very low geometric definition. It is difficult to estimate the extension of the archaeological site on the basis of this image, and compare it with this U2 image taken in 1960 with a very high geometric definition, which made it possible to reconstruct in a very precise way the actual extent of the archaeological site. The reason why we rely mainly upon historical satellite or aerial imagery is related to the fact that old images taken in the 60s, like this corona image of the area of the Duhok, do predate the urban growth, the urban sprawl that the Kurdistan region of Iraq has witnessed in the last decades, and allow, of course, to identify possible archaeological sites that have, of course, to be ground truthed through field work. And this slide here, for instance, shows the situation in the Duhok Valley, which nowadays, as you see from this S3 base map, is completely occupied by the extended city of Duhok, which grew tremendously in the last 40 years, whilst in the 60s, the city of Duhok was limited to this little area along the upper course of the Rubar Duhok River. And of course, on this corona historical image, it was possible to identify many archaeological sites that have been destroyed or concealed by the urban growth of the modern city of Duhok. A second reason why the historical satellite imagery is particularly useful compared even with modern satellite photographs with a very high resolution and much better technology is that in corona and U2 images, these characteristic discolorations of soils which indicate the presence of anthrosols and of possible archaeological sites, as you see here, are very visible, easily visible, I would say. And in many cases, these anthrosols cannot be detected anymore on modern satellite imagery due to plowing activity, which has affected these sites in the last 40 years. So due to all these reasons, the satellite imagery, the historical satellite imagery has become a very powerful tool in the hands of landscape archaeologists. As for the field survey strategy that we have applied, let me just add a few words, because, of course, field methods are very important, because most of the results that archaeological projects have derived from the type of methodologies that they implement. The area that we are surveying is very large, 3,000 square kilometers, and can be surveyed only in the framework of a traditional Mesopotamian survey based on extensive survey, on pedestrian survey. In other words, possible archaeological sites are identified first on satellite imagery and on maps, and are ground-truthed through pedestrian field work based on extensive survey. So we move from one possible archaeological site to the other in order to ground truth them or disprove in some cases if they are not archaeological sites. But from the very beginning of our project, we have felt that an extensive approach to field survey in the region would have limited the potential of our project, and therefore we introduced also a intensive correction of our basically extensive survey, in the sense that we carried out intensive offsite survey through transects in the areas surrounding the main archaeological sites that we have detected during our survey. So we carried out intensive field work in these transects with the aim of identifying small or flat unmounded archaeological sites in the areas included between major sites, and with the aim, of course, also to explore agricultural soil use. Intensive field survey through transects has allowed us to identify pottery field scatters that we have used as indicators of manuring activities and agricultural intensification according to the hypothesis which has been first put forth by the late Tony Wilkinson with his fantastic archaeological archaeology landscape projects. A second area which was the target of very intensive field survey is the area enclosed in the square of 10 by 10 kilometers surrounding the core area of the Navkur plain, this very fertile plain I was talking to you before, at the center of which the main central site of Gir-e Gomel is located. And this is a work which was carried out by Francesca Simi, my colleague Francesca Simi, in the framework of her PhD dissertation, which is now being revised for publication. And focus of this intensive survey through transects was the site of Tel Gomel, which was systematically and intensively surveyed, and all this entire area of 25 square kilometers was intensively surveyed by means of transects, with the aim of establishing the presence of possible sites not yet recognized by the Land of Nineveh Archaeological Project, and to examine ancient land use. And the results were, I must say, quite surprising. To a certain degree, we expected these positive results, but it went far beyond our expectation, because as you see, the extensive transect area didn't give many new sites. During the extensive LONAP survey, we had discovered 32 sites and one site more during the Tel Gomel archaeological survey. But in this area of 25 square kilometers around the site of Gomel, where we surveyed the region by means of intensive survey transects, the difference between the number of sites detected by means of the extensive LONAP survey and the number of sites detected by means of transects is really very high and remarkable. And you can see the difference also on these charts, which shows that particularly for the earlier period, for the prehistoric and the protohistoric period, the difference between the sites recorded by means of transect survey and the sites recorded during the extensive survey is really quite remarkable. And this, I think, are results of the PhD project of Francesca Simi, which are very important not only for our project, but can be very important also for other landscape archaeology projects, and show that a correction in the direction of a more intensive field survey is absolutely needed if one is expected to reconstruct a realistic settlement picture of the occupation of an area. A further tool that we are extensively using, especially in the last year, is the use of unmanned aerial vehicle technology, the drones, which really have brought about a real revolution in landscape archaeology in the last years, because they are quite cheap or not so expensive, and for sure less expensive than high-resolution satellite imagery. And so the use of these, we use these three different typologies and types of drones has given us the possibility of produce very high resolution documentation in terms of orthophotographs and 3D models of the main archaeological sites with a very high resolution of between 6 and 12 centimeters. And this is really a quite revolutionary approach that now many landscape archaeology projects are using, and which is giving really great results. This is the way that we use to collect artifacts, pottery and lithics based on the different topographic units of archaeological sites. It's a very common method in field survey, and all these methods combined have given us the possibility of reconstructing what we call biographies of our archaeological site, and reconstruct the process of establishment, growth, decrease, increase, and then in the end, abandonment of the different archaeological sites through the centuries and through the millennia. So enough for our survey methods. And where are we now thanks to this field working methodology? We were able to chart nearly 1,100 archaeological sites in the land of Nineveh archaeological project study area, which, as you see, is dotted with hundreds of archaeological sites, many more than the 42 sites that were known from the Atlas of Archaeological Sites, or were known through the survey and archaeological excavation in the Eski Mosul Lake dam area. This is the chart illustrating the development in the occupation in the area in terms of number of sites for the different periods that we have investigated, and in terms also of a settled area, in terms of aggregate surface area, which gives also a general indication about the demographic trends occurring in the region. The periods I would like to focus on during today's presentations are the periods ranging from the beginning of the second millennium to the mid and end of the first millennium BC, starting with the Middle Bronze Age, which together with the mid-late third millennium is the first phase, as you see from the graph, of really intensive settlement development in the area, over 200 archaeological sites and an aggregate surface area of more than 500 hectares, which is comparable to that of the previous mid-late third millennium. As you see, the area is quite evenly occupied, with the main focus of human occupation concentrated on this very fertile plain, the Nafkur plain I was already talking about before, an area which is characterized by very deep, fertile and thick fertile soils, well watered by the river Khazir, Nardush, and Gomel, and by the tributary wadis that cross all these areas. So no surprise that one of the main foci of settlement of human occupation are concentrated in the Nafkur plain, and then also in the other Piedmont plains to the south of the city of Duhok, Al-Kosh, and Badre, where the soils, however, are less deep and less fertile, and these explain also this lower density of settlement in the area. What did we know about this region during the Middle Bronze Age, during the first half of the second millennium BC? Not very much indeed, but we had some information from the Mari and the Shemshara and Shushara texts in the area here of eastern Iraqi Kurdistan in the Duhok plain. And the Mari and Shemshara texts of the time of Shamshi Adad I mention in the region to the east and west of the Tigris the Ya'ilanum, a very poorly known Amorite tribe, which was ruled by a king with a very nice Amorite name, Mar Addu, which lived in the lands of Nurugum and Kabra. Where are these lands? We know Kabra thanks to different cuneiform sources and thanks to the very famous Dadusha victory stela representing the killing of the king of Kabra by Bunu Eshtar, king of Eshnunna. The site of Kabra is probably to be identified with the site of Kurdistan, a prominent Middle Bronze Age site, a fortified Middle Bronze Age site in the Erbil Plain, which is currently excavated by Glenn Schwartz of the Johns Hopkins University. And during the Middle Bronze Age, during the time of Shamshi Adad I, the Lonab region here in this area was part of the local kingdom of Nurugum, to which several sites belonged. The site of Talmush, as it is mentioned in the Mari text, to be probably identified with Gir-e which is located approximately here in our study area. The site of Nineveh, as Nineveh is called in these texts. The site of Shibanum, which is the later Middle Assyrian Shibanibe, present-day Tel Bila, and also the site of Kilizum, present-day Kasr Shemamok in this region of the Erbil Plain. The land of Nurugum probably spanned the region on both banks of the Tigris to the north of Ekalatum. And the capital city of Nurugum, of the same name, was possibly located to the east of the Tigris. But the point is, where is Nurugum located? And a hypothesis that I would like to put forth is possibly the city of Nurugum was located at the site of the present-day archaeological site of Gir-e Gomel or Tel Jomel, as the local population prefers to call it, which is a mid-sized, possibly fortified site that during the Middle Bronze Age reached its maximum development, about 35, 40 hectares in size. So it is not one of the huge sites that we know from the Syrian Jazeera or from the Iraqi Jazeera, or even for the Erbil Plain, like Kurdistan, like Bakirta and other sites. It is a mid-sized site of approximately 35, 40 hectares. Archaeological excavations that we have been carrying out at the site together with our colleague Hassan Ahmed Qasim has shown the existence of a main administrative building in the area dating to the Middle Bronze Age, and an elite burial area, a cemetery with very large and monumental vaulted baked brick chamber graves with very large and rich assemblages of grave goods, pottery, metal objects, personal ornaments, all elements which suggest, together with the presence of this main public building and the size of the site and the fact that it was possibly fortified, suggest the existence at the site of an urban elite. So Gomel is the largest Middle Bronze Age site, not only in the Novgorod Plain, but in the whole study area that we are exploring, and one of the largest sites between the Upper Zab and the area of Basetki farther to the west. And according to the description of the sources, it was located in the very heart of the land of Nerugum, and hence my hypothesis that a possible good candidate for the identification of the capital city with the same name of the Nerugum kingdom could be the site of Gir-e Gomel. The Mitanni period witnesses a period, a phase of reduction in the number of settlements, decrease also in terms of aggregate surface area, more than 30% decreased compared to the Middle Bronze Age. And then with the Middle Assyrian period, we start to see a new expansion of the settlement pattern in the area. The Middle Assyrian period is the period in which we witness a northward expansion of the Assyrian core, which previously was located in the area of the Middle Tigris, where Ashur, the earlier capital, and Kartakulti-Ninurta were located. And slowly, particularly during the 13th century, we witness a progressive displacement of the Assyrian core from the Ashur area to the area of what is called the Assyrian Triangle, and also to the area where our survey area is located. This is the phase in which the foundation of the Neo-Syrian Empire are built. And the area was very important also because it was located along the main Tigris route, which connected Ashur, Kartakulti-Ninurta, the Assyrian Triangle, to the upper Tigris river valley in eastern Turkey, present-day Diyarbakir area, where a very thriving and a flourishing settlement pattern has been recorded by excavation and rescue surveys. The following Neo-Assyrian period is one of the main foci of our research. It is the time in which the Assyrian Empire grew and was consolidated and extended from Western Iran to southeastern Anatolia, Syria, the Levant, and down in the 7th century to Israel, Palestine, and even Egypt. But how was this empire built from the material point of view? How was the Assyrian imperial core constructed? This is one of the questions that we have tried to address with our project. In other words, the question that we have asked ourselves is, how did the Assyrian Empire organize materially such a huge territory, and how did it impact on its transformation? And Assyria engineered a planned imperial landscape through the enforcement of a flexible set of actions, of practices aimed at interfering in the conquered societies and landscapes and aimed at maintaining the dominance of the empire in these on the subjected regions. And how did the Assyrians did it? This is what we and other projects have tried to investigate in the very core of the Assyrian Empire in the land of Nineveh, where we have the privilege to work. And I was speaking before of a kit of actions, of practices that were carried out to materially shape and build the empire, the first of which included the foundation of new capital cities and provincial centers. Think about the construction of the new capitals cities in Nimrud by Ashurnasirpal II, or in Khorsabad to Sharukin by Sargon, and later the extension of Nineveh, which became the last capital city of the Assyrian Empire with the reign of Sennacherib. But not only capital cities were established, were created, also provincial centers, Arbail, modern day Erbil, or to remain in the Kurdistan region, in the Erbil plain, the site of Kasr Shemamok, ancient Kilizu. Another type of tool that the Assyrian elite, imperial elites, used to organize the empire was the mixing of population through the forced migration and deportation of prisoners of war. And on this issue, we are informed by the Assyrian royal inscriptions, which also do provide us with figures of the enormous amounts of prisoners of war which were deported, particularly from southeastern Anatolia, from Iran, or from the Levant, and settled in the core of the Assyrian Empire, in the newly established cities and in their countrysides. Of course, we have to handle with care the numbers that Assyrian royal inscriptions, which are, as you all know, ideologically very charged texts and records provide us with. But the numbers that the royal inscriptions record are really very, very high. A third tool which was used by the Assyrian imperial elites to materially build the empire is the creation around the capital cities, Khorsabad and Nineveh in our case, of a very densely settled and highly productive countryside through the settlement of deportees. And as a matter of fact, as you see from the distribution map of Neo-Syrian sites in our Lonap area, we witness a very strong settlement intensification in the Nineveh hinterland, 320 sites, almost 70% increase in terms of number and in terms of sites and in terms of aggregate surface area versus the previous Middle Assyrian period. And what is even more interesting, among the 320 sites that are inhabited during the Neo-Syrian period, more than 150 were not settled during the previous Middle Assyrian period. So this means an almost 50% increase of the site, or that 50% of the sites were newly established, were neo-foundations. So what we are facing is really not a drastic change or reshuffling of the settlement landscape, but we are witnessing a gradual infilling of the landscape with a very strong settlement and agricultural activity intensification. If we compare the Middle Assyrian and the Neo-Syrian settlement patterns map, we see that in the Neo-Assyrian period, in particular, the intrafluvial areas which were very scarcely settled during the Middle Assyrian period have been gradually infilled, and this is the case for the whole area. So in the Neo-Assyrian period, we record more than 60% increase of site density in respect to the Middle Assyrian period. And what is even more interesting is that this phenomenon can be isolated not only in the land of Nineveh area, but is a supra-regional trend that we can observe in Iraqi Kurdistan, in the Erbil Plain survey, where Jason Ur is working since 2012, but we witness the same, we record the same phenomenon also in the North Jazeera project, to the west of the Tigris, in the Iraqi Jazeera, and also in the Habur Triangle and in the lower Habur. So it is a phenomenon of intensification of rural settlement and rural productivity, which landscape archaeology projects have emphasized in the last decades. Another very important tool that was used by the Assyrian imperial elites to materially build the empire is to support the newly established capital cities and provincial centers and the surrounding countryside through the construction of massive regional hydraulic systems, networks of canals based on a very high input of resources, technology, and work that dramatically reorganized the natural hydrology of Assyria. On this map, you see all the main hydraulic projects that have been built during the Middle and Neo-Assyrian period, particularly during the Neo-Assyrian period, but the first hydraulic systems were built already during the late Bronze Age, already during the Middle Assyrian period, which is really, in my opinion, the formative period of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So the Assyrian imperial elites created the real engineered waterscapes that were concentrated in the Assyrian homeland, in what is called in the Assyrian sources Assyria proper. And one of these massive irrigation systems is located in the hinterland of Khorsabad and Nineveh in the Duhok area, where Sennacherib in relatively few years, approximately 20 years, created a very extended regional irrigation system, which was built in 4 stages. I don't want to enter into details. It is really a massive and impressive network of canals, over 240 kilometers of canals, canalized rivers and wadis, aqueducts, weirs, and dams. And the northern part of this regional network of canal, which provided the capital city of Nineveh with water and irrigated also the countryside in the hinterland of Nineveh, is located, as you see, in our survey area. We are dealing really with impressive infrastructures. Just to give you an idea, the Bandawai Canal that you see here is a huge canal with the width of the canal bed between 20 and 30 meters, an overall canal width of over 100 meters and a depth of 20 meters, because these canals were supposed to cross through different watersheds. And this is the reason why Assyrian water engineers were obliged to excavate so deep canals. What you see here is the Faida Canal, which has been the target of a joint Kurdish-Italian excavation together with the Directorate of Antiquities of Duhok that we started in 2019 and which is still ongoing. And which brought about the archaeological exploration of this impressive, over 8 kilometers long canal, along which, as we shall see later on, we have discovered 10 impressive rock reliefs. Here you see an image, a view of the Maltai Canal, another really massive, deep, and very wide irrigation canal, which collected the water of the Rubar Duhok. In the east of our survey area, in the area of Hemis, we had the privilege to explore in the field a very important archaeological site located at the head of the Hemis Canal, the canal that you see here, which brought the water to Nineveh, irrigating at the same time the Nineveh hinterland, where King Sennacherib created a impressive rock art complex that you see here in a watercolor taken by Cooper in the mid-19th century during layered first exploration of the site. The Gir-e Canal that you see here in this photograph, and our survey has demonstrated that what until a couple of years ago was considered by archaeologists a sort of unicum, a unique creation of Assyrian water engineers, in the reality is only one of 5 aqueducts with the same structure, maybe smaller size, but the same concept that Assyrian engineers built wherever it was necessary in order to avoid that the waters from lateral wadis would have destroyed the Neo-Assyrian canal. So we have identified 4 more aqueducts along the canal that Sennacherib called Sennacherib's canal. We have also tried to assess the real impact that the creation of such a massive canal network had on the region's agricultural production system. And as this map show, we were able to prove that the creation of this canal system with all the offtakes and secondary canals which were derived from the main canals created a potentially irrigated surface area of about 300 square kilometers that could be intensively cultivated on the basis of artificial irrigation. So, in other words, in this region, in the hinterland of Nineveh, it was possible to base agricultural production on a combination of extensive dry farming and intensive agriculture based on artificial irrigation. So, in other words, the creation of this extended network of irrigation canals had really had transformative effects on the agricultural production system, transforming the area in the hinterland of Nineveh in the breadbasket for the capital city. And then fifth tool that was implemented by the imperial elites was the diffusion in the landscape of the symbols of royal power and its divine legitimation through the creation of monumental rock reliefs and commemorative royal inscriptions which are distributed across this newly imperial landscape that Sennacherib created in the Nineveh hinterland through the construction of this branched irrigation system. What you see here is a 3D model of the Hemis rock art complex located here, as you see, at the head of Sennacherib's canal, and which included the so-called sculpted monolith, which was erected exactly at the point in which the waters of the river Gomel were diverted into the canal, exactly here in this point, and behind the canal had all the large rock reliefs and rock stelae which were carved by the king's sculptors on the cliff face in Hemis, like the so-called large panel representing the king Sennacherib in front of the two main deities of the Assyrian pantheon, Ashur and his wife Mulissu, or the sculpted monolith I was presenting to you already before, located at the canal head, and which is now collapsed, partially collapsed in the river Gomel. And what you see here is a rendering of the Hemis area, how it would look like, or hopefully will look like, if we will be able to create the Hemis Archaeological Park and conserve the sculpted monolith, which, as you see, is now broken in different parts. We aim to conserve it, put it together, and set it up again exactly in its original position, as you see here from this rendering, flanking the head of the canal, and the point in which the waters of the river Gomel were diverted by this weir into the canal that we plan to re-excavate and partially, of course, reactivate. Another example of incredible and really remarkable rock art complex is represented by the Faida Canal and the Faida rock reliefs. It is really an incredible site which was identified first back in the 70s of last century by Julian Reed, who was able to visit the site only for a few hours. It was a period of the war between the central government and the Baghdad and the Peshmerga, and the site of Faida was located very close to the front line between the Peshmerga and the Ba'athist army was located here immediately to the north of Faida, close to the site of Gir-e. So he was able to shortly visit the site and identified this linear anomaly as an Assyrian canal, and recognized three rock reliefs which were carved on the canal side, and the upper part of which emerged from the canal fill that during the centuries had infilled the canal. In 2019, thanks to a collaboration with my colleague Hassan Ahmed Qasim, Director of Antiquities in Faida, we were able to start a rescue project of this site, which, as you see from this drone photograph, is really besieged by the village productive activities. These are cement brick factories, which are really dramatically besieging and endangering the archaeological site. It is an 8 kilometers long irrigation canal, and along the canal, on the side of the canal, 10 rock reliefs have been carved. 3 rock reliefs had already been discovered by Julian Reed, and our exploration made it possible to excavate 7 more reliefs, like the one that you see here, representing a series of statues of the 7 main gods of Assyria, represented standing on their symbolic animals and standing on podia, which indicates that these are images of the god statues. And at the beginning and the end of each panel, the representation of an Assyrian king, I think King Sargon, who built the system of canals in Faida and Maltai. Let me just show you a very short video to give you an impression of a better impression of this remarkable discovery. I won't comment this very short video. It's only 2 minutes, and leave you free to enjoy the images. So really an incredible site, the site of Faida, that we intend to explore also in the future, in order also to preserve, conserve, and the rock reliefs, and transform the site in an archaeological park. So at the end of the Assyrian Empire, when Nineveh was captured in 612 BC, and the empire very quickly collapsed, also the Nineveh hinterland irrigation system was, I believe, quite quickly abandoned. We have some archaeological evidence on this, because we excavated a trial trench in the junction between the stone Jerwan aqueduct and the earthen canal, in order to investigate this very sensitive point of junction between the stone aqueduct and the earthen canal. And what we found is summarized here in these photographs, and especially here in the section. In the upper part, we have discovered a trampling surface. We carried out the analysis of thin sections of the deposits accumulated on this surface, which do show clear evidence of trampling, because this surface was very probably an ancient road which was created above the abandoned canal after the abandonment of this irrigation system. And below the ancient road, we have found the canal, the real canal bed, the canal bed proper. So in other words, we have archaeological evidence that once the irrigation system was abandoned, probably very fast after the collapse of the Neo-Syrian Empire, the infrastructure, this irrigation infrastructure was not used as such anymore, but it was not totally abandoned because the aqueduct was transformed probably in a bridge over the Wadi, and the ancient canal bed was transformed in an ancient road. And in the field, lying immediately on the ancient road, we have found pottery that which is very worn, difficult to date, but on the basis of the wear and on the basis of few diagnostic shards, we think that we can date the formation of this ancient road between the so-called post-Assyrian period and the Parthian period. So we have evidence of the defunctionalization of the Gir-e aqueduct and the canal and its survival as an ancient road, as an ancient communication road. After the collapse of the Neo-Syrian Empire, we record a decrease in the settlement, in the occupation of the area during the post-Assyrian period. But let me warn you, because the pottery diagnostics that we have for this period are not entirely reliable, or at least I do not consider them entirely reliable. So the figures for settlement numbers and aggregate surface area that we are able to reconstruct may not be precise, but in any way they do clearly indicate a quite dramatic decrease in the settlement occupation of the area. And in the following Hellenistic period, which is a very interesting period, as you will see, we witness a recovery of settlement activity in the area according to the same settlement pattern which was established already in the Neo and Middle Assyrian period, and also in the Middle Bronze Age, with the main concentration of sites in the fertile Nafkur plain, and then also in the plains to the south of the Duhok, Al-Kosh, Badre, and Sheikhan, where the settlement is less intense due to the presence of less deep and less fertile archaeological agricultural soils, and also because these areas are less well watered than the Nafkur plain. At the center of the Nafkur plain, the site of Gomel, which continues to be the central site for the area, also in the Hellenistic period, and which can probably be identified with the site of Gaugamela, a very important site, as you all know, because Gaugamela was the site where in 331 BC, Alexander the Great defeated for the third time after the Granicus battle and the Ixus battle, the great king of Persia, Darius III. And after the victory in Gaugamela, Alexander was able to capture all the capitals of the Achaemenid Empire, first Babylon, then Susa, later on Persepolis, which was then destroyed in 330 BC, as you all know, and Ecbatana. There has been a very intense discussion on the identification of Gaugamela, starting already with Sir Aurel Stein back in the 30s of last century. And there are two schools of thought. The first hypothesis locates the site of the Battle of Gaugamela to the south of our survey area, in the area of Bartella, to the east of Mosul. It would be more or less here, farther to the south, very close to Mosul. And the second hypothesis which was put forth for the first time, but Sir Oral Stein identifies the battlefield of Gaugamela with Gomel and its area. In order to explore this question, Michał Marczak of the Krakow University and I have established a project called the Gaugamela project, and aimed at investigating the question of the identification of Gaugamela through field research, something which had never been done so far. And through an interdisciplinary approach, we think that we are now able to definitely prove that Gir-e Gomel has to be identified with ancient Gaugamela. We have evidence coming from philology, ancient topography, archaeology. First of all, the name of the modern site of Gomel, Gir-e Gomel, in Kurdish, or Tel Gomel, as the inhabitants prefer to call it, is a clear distortion of an earlier toponym, the toponym of Gaugamela, which is recorded in the mid-9th century Syriac manuscripts, particularly in the so-called Book of Governors by Thomas of Marga. Thomas of Marga was the bishop of the diocese of Marga, which corresponds to the Novgorod plain. And Gaugamela is clearly the origin of the present site name, and is clearly a distortion of the ancient Greek toponym of Gaugamela, or Gaugamela, as actually the ancient Greeks would have said. And the Greek name Gaugamela probably derives from the Assyrian and Aramaic name of the site of Gomel, which is mentioned in the Jerwan inscription under the form of Gammagara or Gamgamara, as you see here. And the shift of the M to U and the R to L from Gamgamara to Gaugamela is a phenomenon which is a phonetic shift, which is very well known and very well witnessed in the Semitic languages. So we have first philological evidence that clearly supports the hypothesis that present-day Gomel was ancient Gaugamela of the mid-9th century and ancient Gaugamela and Neo-Syrian Gamgamara. We have there also data coming from the Hellenistic and Roman sources on the topography of the area, which describe the approach route of Alexander's army from the west, from the Tigris forts to the battlefield of Gaugamela, and the approach route of Darius III's army to the area. And in the sources, the approach itinerary crossing two rivers, the Lycos and the Bumelos, probably the Upper Zab, the Great Zab, and the Khazi River is mentioned. And then hills are described, which divide the two armies, the army of Darius III and the army of Alexander the Great, the day before the Battle of Gaugamela, when the two armies pitch up their camps in the region, and they are divided and covered. They are made invisible by low hills, which are probably the Mahad Hills that you see here marked on the satellite imagery. Archaeology tells us that Gomel during the Hellenistic period, during the early Hellenistic period, the late 4th century BC, was a thriving settlement. And we have also remarkable evidence of rock art complexes in the area of the Novgorod plain surrounding Gomel, which might be linked to the presence of Alexander the Great. In other words, our hypothesis is that Alexander the Great created a sort of monumentalize the landscape of victory in the Navkur plain, in the Gaugamela plain, through the cutting of rock reliefs in the surroundings of the battlefields. The first of these rock art complex is the Zeddaka rock art complex, from which you see the Gir-e Gomel site and the actual battlefield. The Zeddaka complex is towering over the Gomel plain, and it is a really amazing and remarkable rock art complex with 8 rock reliefs, very badly preserved, partly destroyed, unfortunately, in very recent years, dating mainly to the Parthian period, 1st centuries AD. But one of these rock reliefs, which is the relief that you see here, might have been carved earlier. It is the so-called rider relief. Unfortunately, as you see, the figures are covered by a very thick, greasy soot layer, which is obliterating the relief that has been also destroyed about 10 years ago. All these figures have been very heavily damaged. You see a detail of the rider relief here representing a winged Nike, which is handling a wreath, a crown that was preserved here and now has been destroyed by vandals, to a rider riding on a horse. This is the horse neck, the horse legs, and the horse back, and here the rider is located. We are planning to clean these soot layer, which is obliterating the relief, making its reading very, very difficult. But our preliminary hypothesis is that what is representing here is a celebratory monument of the victory of Alexander in Gaugamela, representing Alexander on his horse being crowned by a winged Nike. This is a theme which is very well known from Hellenistic art. We have other riders, rock carved riders, like the one that you see here at the Turkish side of Termessos, close to the tomb of Alcetas, who was the brother of Perdiccas, one of Alexander's general, representing Alcetas riding on his horse. And we have a lot of evidence and comparisons for flying Nikes, handling rats to other people, like here on this Alexander's gold statue, representing a standing Nike with a wreath in her right hand on this relief from Ephesus, or also very important, these medallions or coins which were minted at Susa by Alexander after the campaign against Porus, representing Alexander himself being crowned by a flying Nike. We have also more evidence for the celebration of Alexander's victory in the area, because the monumental rock art complex of Hemis that we have already seen bears also a relief which I haven't shown you so far, the so-called Hemis rider relief, which has been for a long time a very enigmatic relief, very badly worn, badly preserved, as you see, representing 2 figures to the left and right, probably 2 figures of an Assyrian king, Sennacherib, under divine symbols. And later, in a second phase, a rider mounted on a horse with a long spear in his hand was added to the original Assyrian relief. The reconstruction, which has recently been given in an article by Julian Reed and Julie Anderson, is the one that I'm showing to you here. This is the original, possibly the original layout of the Assyrian relief representing Sennacherib to the left and right of possibly a cuneiform inscription under divine symbol. In a second phase, a rider has been added at the center of the relief, and then this rider was secondarily recarved in a Parthian style, in the Parthian fashion of the beard, the headgear, the torque necklace that the rider wears. And the point is, when was the rider relief added? It was transformed probably during the Parthian period, as you see here. So the addition of the rider must have occurred between the late Assyrian period and the Parthian period. And the hypothesis that Julian Reed and Julie Anderson put forth in their very interesting and fascinating article is that the rider relief was added by Alexander the Great and represented Alexander with this very long spear, the Hellenistic sarissa, typical sarissa, this very long spear, and he represented himself triumphing over an Oriental king wearing Oriental robes, and who was attacked by Alexander mounted on his horse. So the interpretation of Reed and Anderson is that the Hemis rider relief in its first execution was a commemorative, a celebratory relief of the victory of Alexander the Great in Gaugamela. And finally, to end our talk of today, a new discovery that our expedition made in the field, in the site of Nir Rock, a very badly preserved rock relief representing three Argead suns, which, as you know, are symbols of the Macedonian dynasty, arranged in a tripartite layout. And as you see from the photograph, the relief has been heavily damaged in very recent years when it was used as a target for fire exercise, for shooting exercise. But the inhabitants of the nearby village told us that before destruction, the central star was contained in a lunar crescent, which was located exactly here, and on which we are still able to detect here some marks, some remains. And this makes this rock relief with this tripartite arrangement of three rayed stars or Argead suns, the central one of which was contained in a lunar crescent, very similar to this pottery vessel which was found in Amisos in Turkey on the Black Sea coast, and which is kept in the Royal Museum in Brussels, representing Alexander the Great as Helios Cosmocratos, as the sun ruler of the world, and wearing this very remarkable headgear composed with these three Argead suns or stars, the central one of which is contained in a lunar crescent. So if you put this evidence together, you will notice that the three possible Alexander commemorative rock reliefs were placed exactly at the gateways leading into the Nafkur plain, into the plain of the Gaugamela battle. The Nir Rock relief corresponds to the northeastern access or gateway to the area, Hemis in the northwest, and Zeddaka in the south. So possibly what we are facing here is the creation of a real landscape of victory created by Alexander the Great to celebrate and commemorate his final victory on the Achaemenian great king in Gaugamela, Gir-e Gomel, in 331 BC. And before thanking you for your kind attention, let me express again my gratitude to the Director General of Antiquities of the Kurdistan Region of Iraq, Kak Keifi, for his unremitting support to our expedition, and my colleague and partner, Dr. Hassan Ahmed Qasim, Director of the Duhok Directorate of Antiquities, and all his team for the enduring support that they have given to us in the past 10 years, and to our teams of the Land of Nineveh Archaeological Project who have made all these results possible. And then, of course, last but not least, the funding agencies that have supported our work in these years and hopefully will continue to support us in the future. Thank you very much again for your attention.
Thank you so much. It was extremely interesting. Thank you. Thank you also for your very fascinating interpretation concerning Alexander the Great. It was really, really interesting. So thank you so much. And of course, so congratulations for the award you won in October 2020, I guess, the Khaled Al-Assad International Archaeological Discovery Award for the relief at Faida, as you mentioned in the lecture. So this final part is dedicated to questions. We have some questions in the chat, but of course, if you do have comments, if you do have questions, please write them in the chat and I'm going to read them to our speaker. So, Giorgio Buccellati and Marilyn Kelly Buccellati wrote a wonderful array of data, methods and techniques, an impressive interpretation. Thank you, Daniele. And a marginal question. There was an increase in sites in late Chalcolithic 3. Was there also an increase in site size?
Yes, first of all, hello to Giorgio and Marilyn. I'm very happy that you have joined us, and thank you for your question. There is no particular increase in site size. Your question is, of course, very, very interesting. But the area we are working in is very interesting also from this point of view, because normally what we expect for the late Chalcolithic is, as you correctly said, an increase in the size of at least some archaeological sites. No, think about Khirbet al-Fukhar or Tel Amukar or many other sites which witness a tremendous increase in site size during the late Chalcolithic period. In our area, we noticed during the late Chalcolithic 1 and 2 and 3 to 5 a quite massive increase in number of sites, but no in particular increase in site size. In other words, we do not have evidence of first urbanism starting in the late Chalcolithic period. What we are facing in our survey area is a very diffused rural landscape made up with tiny, small rural villages and no main urban site emerging.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question. Thank you for this great presentation. Difficult question. Have you noticed a local influence on the Middle and Neo-Assyrian period pottery? And if so, were there strong differences between the two phases?
Well, we do see differences in the pottery production between the Middle Assyrian pottery production and the Neo-Assyrian one. But these are the, so to say, canonic differences that we know from many, many other sites in Syria, and northern Iraq. And so the Middle Assyrian pottery assemblages are characterized by the typical carinated bowls, larger bowls, small bowls, and the typical conservation bottles that we know from many other sites and which are labeled as Middle Assyrian administrative pottery assemblages. And the Neo-Assyrian pottery assemblages that we have from our survey are very typical for the area to the north of Nineveh for the capital cities. So I wouldn't say that we noticed local elements, local variation, local modification of these pottery assemblages. They are really the classical Middle Assyrian and Neo-Assyrian pottery assemblages that we know from the central core region of the empire.
Great, thank you. Another question. Thanks for the talk. Besides irrigation, is it possible that the canal network was also used for transportation of ships, for instance?
Yes, this is a very good question. Yes, we have evidence from the Neo-Assyrian sources, from the cuneiform sources, but also from archaeological evidence of the use of rivers in the Neo-Assyrian period for the transport of bulk commodities, for example, for staple food like cereals. Quay walls have been excavated in Nineveh, for instance, and one quay wall has been identified also by our team in our survey area along the Gomel River. Actually, we have identified two quay walls. So they are dating to the Neo-Assyrian period. And this is a clear indication that rivers were at least seasonally navigable and were used to transport bulk commodities. But we have also limited evidence, limited textual evidence for the use of canals for transportation. And I personally believe and many other colleagues do believe the same, that Neo-Assyrian canals, particularly these very large canals like the Hemis Canal, for instance, or the Nimrod Canal, for instance, could have been used also as waterways to transport, for instance, bulk food commodities, staple foods like cereals, from areas where they were intensively produced, like the Navkur Plain, like the Nineveh hinterland, and to transport them to the capital city on the basis of very low costs, of course. And so it is very, very, very possible and probable, I would say, that the canals were used as waterways as well.
Really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It seems we don't have any more questions. No, okay, we don't have any other question. So I would like to thank you once more for your lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for hosting the lecture.
Well, thank you, absolutely. It was a pleasure. And thank, of course, to our public. Thank you so much for being with us. We really hope you enjoyed this lecture. Our next encounter will be on Wednesday, February the 10th at 5 p.m. Italy time, as usual. Adam Smith will give a lecture titled Project Aragats, 2 Decades of Archaeological Research in Central Armenia. Thank you so much again, and see you next week.